Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. We're going on a trip over to the coast, and oh, how I look forward to going over to Brookings or Smith River. And here's my guest. And I want to welcome you all the way from Pacific Ocean.
Yes, yes.
And the Pacific Ocean gets some water right through Smith River, right? What's that river?
Right close to, well, there's the Smith River, and there's the, what's the big river?
The Klamath.
Well, the Klamath River.
Lots of rivers
What
along
goes
there.
What goes under the fine bridge?
That's the Smith River.
Oh, yes, yes. And it winds down then to the ocean. And we love to go to where the river flows into the ocean. It is so interesting because down a long peninsula is just as calm and beautiful as can be. And then look on the other side, and here are the waves coming in. So my son was there one day with his little son, and we took a picture on this side, and they happened to just come out even. They could take hands, and they were just on both sides of the peninsula, both sides of the water.
Oh, but that's not where you started by the Pacific Ocean. Where was it that you came from? This farm?
A little house in the prairie was where I started in Canada. But that's a long time ago.
A lot.
But it looks like it could have been any prairie, so.
Now, well, you mind me asking how long ago this was that you were born on the prairie?
94 and a half years.
Hey, you're well preserved.
I'm still having a wonderful time. Thank you to my good children in the Lord.
Well, good children. Why don't you tell us about how many children did you have?
Well, we had 2 girls before my husband had to go to the war. And when he came back, we had 2 boys, and that was a big family. But I thought I wanted a little girl, and I got a cute little boy, and I said, okay, I have a little girl next year. We did. And here she was after 3 boys, and I said, she has to have a little sister. And my neighbor said, what's the matter with you? You know you'll have twin boys. And we had twin boys. I said, she hexed me.
Now, this is the family.
These are the children.
This is the 2 little girls.
Yes.
And who's sitting next to you?
That one, the middle one.
And this
That is Virginia.
Virginia, welcome to Better Life Television.
Thank you.
Tell
it's a privilege to be here.
Where do you come from? Where do you hail from?
Well, right now, I stay with Mother in Smith River.
Uh-huh.
But this is interesting. Joanne was born in Boston because my husband was going to take his residency and practice in Boston. But the Army took us down to the south just in time for Virginia to be born in Chattanooga.
So you're, no wonder you have that accent.
Right.
You were an infant in Tennessee, huh?
I came by it a little bit more honestly a few years later.
Well, and how's that?
Let's see, when I was about 5, we moved to Madison, Tennessee, lived there for 10 years.
Well, what had you traveling?
Well, that was when my husband spent 5 years in the Army. Then he got out and needed another residency, and then needed a place to practice, and he was invited to go there. So he did, and there was a school, and we just spent 9 or 10 nice years there.
Well, now, you said in the Army. You're talking World War II.
Yes. Early on, a very brilliant professor persuaded many of the students to sign up as reserves. So the minute that there was anything coming up, all those reserves had to go in the Army. And so residencies and everything else were interrupted. They had to go in the Army. And out of a surgical practice, he had to do kitchen patrol and gas patrol, and occasionally carry the bag and go with them on maneuvers. And
you're telling me a trained doctor that was just shy of his MD.
He had his MD. He was on his way to get his specialty in surgery. But then he had time in Ireland, and finally they crossed. And the day that the boats went across, he was held back to direct traffic of soldiers coming in and soldiers going out. So he didn't go across on D-Day on those boats. He went a little later. and somebody found out that in the meantime he had gone to an anesthesia school to study during those 9 months he was in Ireland. And they found that out, and they snatched him out of where he was and then put him in a surgical unit, which was a surgeon, an assistant, a nurse, and an anesthetist. And that's where he was until the war was over.
And that's in where?
In Europe.
Was he in France, or was he in?
He was, yes, crossed France, because I had perfume from Paris.
Oh, I remember
And then
well.
it was, let's see, where was the big bulge? In Belgium?
Okay.
Okay, because they were operating, and a bomb blew up a big, huge tent where they had activities right beside it in the corner of their building, and they calmly finished their surgery. And then I'm not sure where he ended up in Czechoslovakia. And of course, I was counting credits all that time. So when finally it was over, I said he has enough credits, he can come home. But it took a little while yet.
And so that's how you have the 2 big girls and 2 littler boys.
Well, and then when he came home, eventually we had the 2 boys.
And so all these, and this is?
That is in my college days. That's me, but it was in college days.
Well, where were you? A little girl from the prairie. How did you even imagine to go to college?
Well, I didn't imagine, because I was taken around. My parents had a homestead in Canada, and when it was dry for 7 years and then had a beautiful year, they sold out and got out of Canada. And I grew up in Portland and went to Walla Walla College.
And you just knew you wanted to get an education? Your folks weren't educated people.
Oh, yes, they were. My mother graduated from Walla Walla College in 1908, and my father spent a year or 2 there. And so, but then they were not able to help us. Those were hard days. Those were Depression days. I mean, I'm still a child of the Depression. But eventually, I wanted to be a nurse. But by the time my sister and I were up in high school even, she could go from high school graduation right over to the Portland Sanitarium and start nursing.
That's this older girl.
No, my sister.
Her sister.
My sister. Not my child, my sister.
Okay.
All right, 1 year later, I graduated. Then I needed a year of college to go. So it was a while. It saved me a while. Took me a while to save $45 to go and start to college.
$45, folks, do you hear?
I could work at whatever there was to work at, and I came out $17 in debt at the end of the first year. So that was college those days. But you knew everybody, and it was so much fun.
You had fun in college?
Oh, yes, it was wonderful. I never wanted it to end.
Did your mom tell you stories about going to school? And
Yes.
Grandma and Grandpa going to school?
Yes. And Mother always talked about how much fun college was. It was a terrible shock to me to get to college and find out it was really a lot of hard work.
But you did it. And
Yes.
how many of these children went to college?
All of them. One boy didn't quite finish. He got a yen to get out and play music. And he said, I'll go back, Mother, I'll go back. And later I said, and when are you coming back to college? Well, I have a job now, you know, I don't need to go back. So there's only one that didn't finish college.
Well, my congratulations to you. Instilled in them prairie tenacity, is that right?
I guess so.
Well, this
Mother didn't tell you that they went directly from Alberta, Canada to Honolulu, Hawaii.
For why?
Because my father wanted to thaw out. He said he got so cold in Canada. We had lots of interesting things. But I was 3 until I was 5, and you know, I took it for granted. I didn't realize what a special thing it was, except when the Queen died. My mother took my older sister and I, all dressed up in our best clothes. I remember going on the streetcar and going to the palace and seeing this Queen of Hawaii lying in state. And it was such a big room, and it was so solemn. And at the head of the bed, they were putting palm branches up and down, up and down. People were standing around. We were so impressed.
What was her name, Mother?
Lily Ukulani. And I had a little sister born during that time. And she was named Margaret Harriet Louise Lily Ukulani. The Margaret was a sister of my mother. The Harriet was a cousin. The Louise was a friend. And then we had to attach little Yukalani. She lived only 2 years, but we just called her Lukey. She died in the diphtheria epidemic in Oregon. But
In what year was that?
I don't remember, whenever the big diphtheria epidemic was. But my husband and I went back over there to a medical meeting, and I wanted to see this palace again. So we went down there, and they were remodeling it, renewing it or something, but we got to go in and walk around. This was such a little crowded room. I couldn't believe it.
Now, was she the very tall queen? Was she?
I don't remember, because that's the only time I ever saw her lying in that bed in state.
Because when I was in Kona, my sister took me, she was living there, working there, and they took me to the room, and this was the queen's, in a museum, queen's bed, and it seemed to be 7, 8 feet long.
I wonder, I don't know.
Well, somebody in our viewing audience will have the answer, and they'll call
There
in
you
Better
go.
Life TV. Now,
There you go.
these are your children, right?
That's right.
And these are your
Grown-up children. That's right.
Now,
In order of age.
oh, here's the baby. That makes
No.
this you.
No, this starts the opposite. The one beside me is the oldest.
Yes, so that makes you.
Yes.
Yes.
This.
Yes.
See, and then 3 boys and a little girl. Now, didn't she need a little sister? She got 2 wonderful brothers.
Okay, and now the lady in the center, that's the mother.
And maybe somebody will recognize that that's Dr. James Schuler, and they know Francis Schuler from Portland. They were brothers.
Oh,
So that's,
okay. Now
that's
he has a
Francis's
serious walking stick there.
well, he was feeling his age, and he has given up the struggle.
Well, now, if you're 92 now, when was
94.
94? What would you say to people who are getting close to 90?
Just keep on.
Oh,
I know, it's the Lord's blessing, but I read one time, if you want to keep young, have something you can't wait to get to the next morning. And my career has turned into my knitting, because all these years that I was too busy, I was planning to do things, stashing yarn and accumulating and thinking, I'm going to knit. Now I'm trying to get the knitting done.
Knitting, knitting, knitting. When I came to Better Life TV, they said, why, she's even donated some kafgans or ponchos. And so if someone needs this real bad, just call up, say, well, gray is my color, and I'd like to donate to Better Life. Or maybe you'd like the multicolored one. How do you make these? I mean, this is an awful lot of stitches.
Well, it's a long strip of stitches. I make them on a machine, the long strip parts. And then it's just a way you put them together and then trim the edges.
And this is all done by hand.
That's crocheting.
I'd like to slip one on right now, but you can envision this, and it would keep you warm, and it could.
They've been very good the last few years. People have worn a lot of ponchos.
And these were here as a donation to Better Life.
Well, I thought they might start a gift shop here, but Marta said they just don't have room for it.
Well, we've expanded and expanded here at Better Life Television, and we're in every corner. We fill up every corner of this
Well,
place.
I think with 3ABN that somebody else has the gift shop in another building, and it isn't part of their shop there.
Well, you know about 3ABN.
Oh, yes.
What do you know? What can you tell us about? Have you been there?
Yes. We were in San Diego at Chula Vista Church, and they said, be sure and come back this afternoon at to a music program. So we did, and it was Danny and Tommy and Jerry Lynn and Linda. They were all there putting on this beautiful music program. And after the sun went down on Sabbath afternoon, Danny told this vision of what he had and what he wanted to do. And it just seemed so wonderful that the Lord chose a young carpenter that would listen to his call. And what has happened, nobody had worldwide television before that I know of. Maybe they did, but not in our circle.
Absolutely not. And the story here is about a friend from Rogue River who had visions that if they could
That's right.
television could come into Oregon. It could come right here
Oh,
in
that's
Grants
wonderful.
Pass. Started over at this church school, a little room, moved to the front part of this building. And, if it hadn't been for Delmer Wagner with the expertise and Bob Heisler with the, connections that he had, put it all together. There are a couple of ham radio operators, so I'm pretty proud of that, too.
Mm-hmm.
Put it all together. That's why Better Life TV's on.
Isn't that wonderful?
We've expanded to 7 counties, and now we're hoping for 4 more.
I know, we're hearing about that.
All it takes is dream, vision. Doesn't it say someplace about it? People perish because they don't have vision.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can tell us stories about Mom. What's your favorite about Mom when she was a little girl?
Hold my breath.
When she was a little girl. It was just a one-room cabin that they lived in, and there was a potbelly stove in the middle of it. And in the wintertime, they just pulled all the beds as close as they could to the stove, and yet in the morning, sometimes there'd be snow on the outside edge of the beds.
And I bet you there's a little place out back with a...
Oh, I'm sure.
Was there a little house out back with a moon over the door?
I don't remember. Oh, I'm sure there was. But I don't remember much. My very first memory, I think, is there, and that was of a runaway horse.
Oh.
Going down a stream. I remember water and rocks, and we're all hanging on. I think that's my very first memory.
You were on that horse.
We were in the carriage it was pulling. But nothing ever crashed, and I don't remember what happened. Anyway.
I can just imagine rocks.
But then, when I was in high school, we moved to Coquille for 2 years. And
the ocean?
Well, it was nearer the ocean. It was down in Coquille. But I remember where we were. It was in Fairview Valley. People may recognize that. And as we looked up, here was this beautiful green hill. And during that 2 years that we lived there, they logged that off, not like they do now, but there wasn't one thing left, and they did not reforest it. I think they have since then. But I remember that my dad went with other neighbors, and they cut trees and cut them and had their horses to level the road and made a corduroy road to Coquille, or to part of it, maybe out to the main one.
You've just used a word, corduroy road. What is a corduroy road?
Where the split logs are laid down, so you're not in the mud, you just go bump, bump, bump.
Do you remember riding on that?
Oh, yes. Yes, I was high school age then. But then my husband and I went through that valley a few years back, and now there is a road to Coos Bay. It was Marshfield then.
Right.
And to go to Marshfield was a big deal because you had to go clear around by Coquille and wander around to Marshfield and North Bend. And now there is a nice road through there. And we drove down in there looking for a for sale sign and didn't see a single one. I guess people still like to live there.
I remember going over to the coast. The Weavers had moved from Grants Pass over to Marshfield. And they had a candy store in Marshfield, and I'd never been in a candy store in my life, and they had little hats made out of gummy things. I thought that, there'd been nothing more beautiful or tasty.
Arrived.
I had arrived. Do you remember, then where did you move?
Well, we moved back to Portland. My dad had work there, and we were in high school, and when we were down there, we had to live with other people to go to high school because we couldn't go back and forth, of course, from out of Fairview.
On the corduroy road.
But I remember the corner, and I don't remember how far it was, but it was Fairview Corners, and there was a little church there and a school, and it was very much part of our family life too, though we had our own church, but we would go and have church with them too. And it was just, I just loved it. I just loved it. I've loved it ever since.
And you said someday when...
I wanted to come here. My husband talked about Florida. He thought he could garden all year at Florida, but he got changed real fast. He grew up in Hood River and then in Medford. His father grew pears in Medford.
Oh, really?
And he went from there to medical school. But we spent a snowy Christmas with my youngest daughter in Boise and came through Portland and kind of slid down to the beach over ice and snow, and these trees were just all frozen. We got to Lincoln City. It wasn't even cold. There was just a little mist in the air and all the lights from Christmas and everything, and we just fell in love with it. That's where we were going to live someday when we could get settled.
So Lincoln City looked like
Well, it just
home.
Yes. It just was comfortable and beautiful. And we went on back down, and that's when we drove out to Fairview to see it again and found out that there was a road that went back to Coos Bay.
But no corduroy anymore.
Oh, no. Now a nice paved road.
Can you even imagine what it would be like to ride on that?
Well, she probably can, because they had African roads.
10 years in Africa taught me exactly what corduroy roads were like. There, it was just dirt or gravel roads, but somehow as vehicles went over them, they just developed corduroy. Periodically, they would come and grate them again. But
Oh, I'm going to have to hear more about that later.
She has marvelous
She
stories.
has
from
stories.
Africa.
But now tell me about you. Lincoln City's up here, and I know that you're you're even into California now.
We are.
So
Oh, well, when the time came, now that we were really retired, we were in Southern California with our older daughter, helping her children with school because she had to go to work and they needed a way to get to school and Grandma be home after school. When they were up then about an academy age, while we were set out on our own, and I remember we had a pickup loaded and we had a trailer behind it, and our one grandson came out and they said, well, don't know where you're going, just like Grandpa, just like Abraham. Well, he had given up all his licenses everywhere except California.
medical
And
licenses.
so, medical licenses. So he said, we'll go as far north in California as we can. So we started at Scotia. They didn't need a doctor. We stopped at Fortuna. They didn't need a doctor. I think at Eureka, they told us about a doctor that wanted somebody to take locum tenens. So we got a month over in, what?
Hayfork.
Hayfork. That's right. We spent a month in Hayfork, but that was later. Anyway, we kept going north, and in Crescent City, he went to see Dr. Lansing, whom he had known in Walla Walla. And when he was in Walla Walla, Lansing was building houses. He was older than my husband. But 5 years later, when Jim's younger brother went into medicine, Dr. Lansing started too. So they were friends, and they sang together. They were great friends. And he said, well, why don't you go up to Smith River? And it looked, like a village. And Jim said, well, can I make a living there? He says, well, the last doctor did. So we moved to Smith River as far as we could go in California, and that's where we've been ever since. Just love it.
Oh, I think that's wonderful.
We have elk in our front yard. They look in our windows, and we look out at them.
Folks who've been watching Better Life TV and Journeys and Journals a long time will remember the Knutsons. And you said you know the Knutsons.
They're our neighbors.
Because you live on Knutson Road?
Knutson Road, that's right.
Oh.
This was all his lily beds. And our pond, I believe he dug so he could water his lilies. We have a spring. We were up there to see, there were 3 lots. And we were with our real estate lady, and she couldn't quite figure it out. And my husband said, well, give it to me. I'll go ask this person here, a man living right there. And it turned out to be Knutson. He came out and he said, sure, I'll tell you which one. That one, that one, that one. And Jim said, which is the best one? Well, he said, that one is. That's the one I didn't want. It's a little bit downhill, and I wanted the high one. Anyway, he says it has a spring and a stream and a pond and a well.
Ooh.
Well, and he said the water never runs dry in a dry year.
And this was Carl Knutson,
That's
who was
right,
on
yes.
our
That
TV
was
show.
Carl.
And he makes boats? Is he still making boats?
No, he doesn't. Well, now in the summer he paints some out there. Shall I tell you a little story on her, since she was so frank with you? We were there, and it was Friday afternoon, and he was just talking up a storm to us. He's such a friendly person. And pretty soon he heard, Carl, Carl, just a little louder and louder. And she came out and says, you have wet paint on that boat. Well, he had to tell us goodbye real quick and go. The next morning we went to church, and there they were sitting right in front of us.
So you knew.
We knew them right away. They were friends.
Oh, well, Carl came from, his dad built boats for the Rogue River.
Yes.
And then Carl has done all the boats on the Klamath,
And Diamond Lake.
the Diamond Lake ones, and they bring them down to him now.
Now they do.
But when the floods came down the Klamath River, they sent all his boats crashing into the Pacific, except for one that found up in Astoria.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
You know, that's a mystery.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, you know, I just love learning all about you, and I'm going to ask your daughter to come and do a show just so that she can tell me a little bit more. But you have history. Were you working all this time, in Africa?
Well, they were.
Oh, they were in Africa, but you were off in...
I was mothering. I took dietetics, which turned out to be just a wonderful thing to feed my family.
Oh, good.
So,
you could cook out of almost anything from
just
that garden?
get something together. But, fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables.
But when Mom and Dad retired the first time at 65, they moved to Thailand. And worked in Thailand for almost 6 years.
What a vacation, huh?
Yes, it was exciting. It was wonderful. I loved it.
Now, why Thailand?
Well, because because they asked us to come to Africa with our children, and then the work in Ethiopia closed up, and they sent all the workers down to Tanzania, and so they said, would you go to Thailand? Well, they didn't need to ask that twice, because that was exciting. But then we got all through that and went back home, and then somebody called and said, would you come to South Africa, Maludi Hospital, for just 6 months? We need somebody to fit in, but we got to stay 1 year.
What a story. You're a globetrotter, and I love it. Thank you for coming to Better Life TV.
Thank you.
I am so excited, and we'll just have you sit in while we find out a little bit about this daughter of yours. So tune in next week, folks, and we're going to just learn more and more about, the family name is?
Schuler.
The Schulers.
But she's Smith.
Well, we know about the Smiths from Smith River. No, the Schulers from Smith River.
Yes.
Thanks again, folks, for tuning in. I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying bye for now.